Morning. Today is Friday, May 8th. May 8th, we're looking at Matthew chapter number 26. Matthew 26, verses 57 through 75. Matthew 26, we're looking at verses 57 through 75. Like I said, every single day we're going to look at a certain word and see how it applies to this passage, each of these passages. And today what we're going to do is we're going to look at this word humbleness. Look at the word humbleness. And we're going to see, I mentioned it yesterday that... or the day before, that Moses was the most humble person in the Bible, the meekest person in the Bible. Those are almost synonyms, one and the other. Meekness and humbleness, they're very closely related. Okay, so we see Moses as the meekest person, but we see an example of humbleness. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at really kind of two sides of the coin. Someone who was humble and someone who wasn't humble. Someone who understood what it meant to be meek and humble. Somebody who thought they were humble but actually weren't. Okay, we're going to look at this. And what we're doing here is we see that Jesus is put to trial. Jesus put to trial. This is actually the night of Jesus' crucifixion. And we see early in the eve what's taking place is that he's put to trial and ultimately going to be put to death. He's going to be crucified. And so what they did in verse number 57 is they had this group of crowd, a few rioters, and what they did is they took Jesus on trial. And Peter kind of followed afar off. Now remember what took place this very same evening. What happened is Jesus had the Last Supper with all of his disciples, and he told them, one of you are going to deny me. And Peter said, no, I would never deny you. I'm going to follow you to the end. And Jesus went on to elaborate and said, you know what, actually, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And what's going to take place is we're going to deny me 3 times before you hear the rooster crow. That's what's going to happen. Peter said, no, it's never going to happen. I'm going to follow you. I would never deny you. I've been with you these past 3 years. I've followed you. I've been your disciple. And we see here Peter, he's following afar off. I think that's a kind of a spiritual statement as well, is that when we begin to follow Jesus Christ, not close, but we begin to follow him from afar off, there are certain things that begin to take place in our life that are not going to be good. We're going to be making certain decisions and doing certain things that shouldn't be happening because we're not close to Christ. We're not following him close. We're following him, as Peter says, from afar off. We see that in verse number 58. But Peter followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace. Far off. Now we see an example of humbleness. Now we see Jesus Christ is being accused. He's been accused of all these different things and wanting to be put to death. And we see move down to verse number 63. But Jesus held his peace, and the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee, or I command you, by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus goes ahead and tells him. Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. And then they said, you know what? That's what we have. This is blasphemy. He got angry. Many times to show their display of emotion and anger, what they would do is they would rip their outer coat. The Bible says in verse 65, Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. And we see that this was something that could put them to death. But honestly, what they needed is the Jews couldn't put him to death. The Jews were in charge of themselves, and what they did is they had the Romans above them. And what would happen is the Jews had some laws and they could do certain things, but one of the things they couldn't do is they couldn't put someone to death. What they had to do is they had to take them to a Roman court and get permission from the Roman court to put Jesus Christ to death. So what they did is they had this court and they took him to the Roman court, and when they were ready, say, hey, look, now we have a reason to put him to death. Let's go to the Romans and let's do this. And so what they did is they began being disrespectful to Christ. And you can see in the following chapters in Matthew chapter number 27 through the crucifixion, but all this really it begins here. And what they did is they began to spit on his face. They began to slap him, then punch him. We see that in verses 66 and 67. And began to beat him. And while all of this is taking place, notice what we have. So we have the example of humbleness, where Jesus Christ just said the facts. He didn't speak up. He didn't argue. He didn't say any of these different things. And basically, he let his testimony say who he was. He didn't have to run his mouth like a fool does. He didn't have to do any of those things. Basically, they made themselves look foolish by speaking against Christ, and he knew that. But we see an example of someone who thought he was humble, but wasn't. We see the Apostle Peter. Verse 69, now Peter sat without in the palace, and a damsel came unto him, saying, Thou also was with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them all, saying, I know not what thou sayest. So here's the first time where Peter denies Christ. There's this girl that comes up, say, hey, I remember seeing you with that guy. You were with him. Right? He says, Peter said, no, that wasn't me. And then we continue to see verse number 71. And when he was gone out into the porch, another girl said, saw him and said unto them that were there, this fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. Yes, you were. I remember seeing you. You were the one that was always speaking up. You were in the forefront, because that's what Peter's personality. He kind of had to be the center of attention. He was in the front. I remember seeing you with him. And notice what it says. Verse 72, and again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. So basically he swore, right? Maybe he didn't use profanity, but he swore. He says, no, with an oath. Meaning like, I swear by whatever. It doesn't say exactly what it was, but he kind of made it a stronger point saying, no, I definitely was not with that guy. Twice we see that he's denied, and we got one more. Verse 73, and after a while came unto him they that stood by him, said to Peter, surely thou also art one of them, for thy speech bewrayeth thee. What is thy speech? Well, basically what we can do is we can kind of figure out where somebody is or where they're from based upon how they speak. We can figure out what part of the country they're from. Maybe we can figure out they're from up north, or we can figure out they're from the south, or we might can figure out maybe English isn't their first language because they have an accent. We can see and we can hear all those different things. We can figure that out. But we say that it says, hey, thy speech bewrayeth thee. You are definitely one of them. You're from that part of the land where Jesus came from. The Sea of Galilee, all of there. I can tell by how you talk. It bewrayeth thee, it betrays you. It tells you where it's from. Verse 74, then began he to curse and to swear, saying, I know not the man, and immediately the cock crew. And we see verse 75, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, which said unto him, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. So we see here that an example of humbleness in Jesus Christ, but we see an example of not really that they thought they were humble, but they weren't. 1 Corinthians chapter number 10, verse number 12 says, wherefore let a man take heed when he standeth, take heed lest he fall. What that means is, hey, if you think you're somebody and you think that you're able to go through something without being affected by it, you better be careful, because you might be the very one that's going to fall. We see an example of humbleness in Jesus Christ. We see an example of supposed humbleness, but in reality was pride and was ultimately cut down. Pride cometh before destruction, and a haughty spirit cometh before a fall. We see that in the book of Proverbs. And we see that's exactly what took place to Peter. What I want you to do is I want you to think about this passage and read it through a couple times, and I want you to think about this concept of humbleness, how Jesus Christ displayed it, and how Peter tried to display it, but in actuality, he didn't. Hope you have a good weekend. Have a great day.